I kind of think of it as diabetes almost gives you an excuse or a reason to have to manage it. Because for a lot of people, our mindset is that, oh, well, I can go until you hit that wall and then you have to stop. And you have to face the decisions that you've made in the past and really reevaluate the way that you've handled your life and the way that you live your life. So like I said, it kind of gives you a reason or excuse to live the best life that you can.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hoda Labrador. This is episode 62, and my guest is registered dietitian Daphne Olivier. She graduated from the University of Louisiana and has been a certified diabetes educator since 2009. She is the founder of My Food Coach, her private nutrition practice, where she works with people with varying degrees of metabolic disorders, including prediabetes, types 1 and 2 diabetes, and more. Today, she educates all of us about the disease and gives strategies for how to manage it and how to avoid it altogether. Before we dive into the conversation, we want to thank our sponsors. Wise Traditions is supported in part by the Weston A. Price Foundation. They are dedicated to restoring nutrient-dense foods to the diet through education, research, and activism. Visit westonaprice.org. And listeners like you, we count on your support to keep the show on the air. Keep listening and sharing the shows that mean the most to you. And thank you so much. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Daphne.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're going to have an interesting conversation today because I see that diabetes is on the rise in the U.S. population. Is that right?
Absolutely. There are millions of people that have diabetes, and then even more that have not yet been diagnosed with like a pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. I talk to people all the time that tell me, I don't have any health problems, and then the minute they go to the doctor, they start actually looking and finding a variety of different things that they have. So yeah, diabetes is definitely on the rise.
Yeah, a lady in my exercise class one day just came in and was like, oh, I have diabetes. And I was like, what? It seemed to come out of the blue. What's the deal? Is this like a natural thing that happens as you age?
No, not at all. So diabetes is a metabolic dysfunction that usually at diagnosis, you have had some changes in blood sugar for about 5 to 7 years prior to the diagnosis of diabetes. Part of the challenge with the diagnosis is that usually they're checking blood sugar like right whenever you get up in the morning before you've had anything to eat or drink. But whenever diabetes starts happening and you start having these changes in glycemic control, it usually happens after you have something to eat. So your body has a hard time bringing down your blood sugar after you eat, but it takes very, very, very many years for it to actually affect the part that they're testing for whenever they're trying to do tests for diabetes to see if you have problems.
Why would the body have trouble digesting the sugar, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Or metabolizing your sugar.
So the whole endocrine system gets disrupted. What happens is whenever you eat something that has carbohydrates, so carbohydrates are essentially the breakdown of what's going to break down into glucose that your body has to then find a way to use as its energy source. Mm-hmm. So glucose is the natural energy source for the body for a variety of different reasons, including bad food, stress, sleep disturbances. All of those things disrupt the hormone balance that tell the body to produce insulin or tell the cells to be able to utilize that glucose that once it gets into the cells. So it's just a whole metabolic dysfunction that happens, and it starts off really slow. You don't really realize what's going on, and then all of a sudden you have this whole metabolic catastrophe.
Kids are getting it too, right?
Yes, kids get type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is, we know, an autoimmune disease where the body starts to attack the pancreas cells that secrete insulin. What's more prominent in our society is type 2 diabetes. And that's typically whenever the cells are not recognizing insulin. So the body can produce insulin, but the cells can't recognize it. Or eventually, once the disease progresses, the body starts to lose its ability to produce insulin. So whenever we think of kids with diabetes, it's mostly type 1, where it's the autoimmune part and their body can't produce insulin. But more and more kids, because of our diet, at a younger age are developing type 2 diabetes, which is what used to be considered an adult disease.
Wow, that's kind of scary.
It's very scary. And it's sad. It's really sad because these children in many places are being brought up on really poor quality food, and that's all they know. They don't really have the chance or the choice to be able to make any difference.
Now, is there any way for diabetes to resolve in adults or children?
It can. If it's caught early, there's more likely to be able to get blood sugar well controlled. So I'd sometimes hesitate to say, we certainly aren't saying that we cure it. It can be, reversed. But if it's caught early and you start to address some of the metabolic issues, so you really have to start with some kind of activity program or movement, whether you call it exercise or not. You have to move your body more frequently than what the typical American does. And then we also have to be very cognizant of what you're eating. So movement and exercise is one part, the diet is one part, and then the other lifestyle factors that definitely play a role is sleep and sleep disturbances. So with the growing number of people that have sleep apnea or insomnia, that plays a role in insulin resistance, which is kind of the precursor to developing diabetes. And then stress. So we know that we can't eliminate stress, but stress plays a big role in blood sugar balance. And so we really have to work on finding ways to keep our lives happy and fun and less stressful. So managing that stress that's just the day-to-day stressors of our life.
Yeah, the things you're mentioning, I'm feeling like we can do something about these things. Like lung cancer is linked to cigarette smoking. Okay, so if you stop smoking, you reduce your chance of getting lung cancer. It sounds like a lot of these factors are within our control.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy working with people that have diabetes, because in many cases, it takes just a little bit of change and you start seeing the change in blood sugar. Because we have the ability and the technology to be able to check blood sugar at home, you don't have to wait for your next doctor's appointment in 3 months or 6 months. You can check your blood sugar every single day, wherever you are. So you start making changes to your diet and you can monitor your blood sugar to see how those changes are affecting your blood sugar. Or you go for a walk and you can monitor your blood sugar to see exactly how that's affecting your blood sugar. So a lot of what's happening with type 2 diabetes specifically is very much lifestyle related. I view diabetes as being just the ultimate or best lifestyle, lack of stress or paying attention to the ways that we handle stress, making sure that we're getting enough sleep. So we tend to think of sleep as almost being like a luxury, that it's something that's done whenever there's nothing else to do, but it really is a very important part of our metabolic system. And so really paying attention to sleep and making sure you're getting enough sleep. And if you have things like sleep apnea or any kind of obstruction, that you get those things addressed, because it's changing your whole metabolic system. It doesn't just make you tired the next day. It changes all of your hormones and the way your hormones talk and interact with one another.
Oh my gosh, that is so fascinating. And I think a lot of our listeners are probably people who work on the food piece, but forget some of these other things, the stress, the sleep. These are also important factors in how we manage our health.
Absolutely. Food is obviously one very big part of it, but if the food is causing a lot of extra stress, then you're really not doing a whole lot of good by perfecting your food habits. Mm-hmm. And then the exercise part too. I think just as a society, we kind of get into the idea of, okay, I'm going to exercise, and then we do that, 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour of exercise, and the rest of the day we're sitting down at a computer or, watching TV or whatever, but we don't have a whole lot of activity throughout our entire day. And there are a lot of studies that show that activity and movement, no matter if your heart rate is getting up or not, plays a big role in helping to manage blood sugar. So we need to look at the big picture, and they're all things that we can do. And I kind of think of doing things as a stair-step approach. Like, what is the thing that is causing the most challenge for you now? And let's kind of work on some of those. As a dietitian, I don't always necessarily focus on the diet first. Sometimes we really need to look at sleep and really kind of focus on sleep and make sure someone's getting adequate sleep, because if you're not sleeping well, then you really don't have the energy or the focus to be able to pay attention to your diet as much.
Well, speaking of sleep, let's talk practically. I know you're a mom with little kids probably.
Yeah.
How do you do it? Do you have any personal tips that you can help our listeners with?
Well, I think being on a schedule, your body will get very used to being on a schedule. So having a time that you go to sleep at the same time every night and wake up roughly the same time, and allowing yourself to have at least 7 hours of sleep every night. So on one side, we kind of have to say, okay, sleep is important, and it's as important as everything else, and give yourself the okay, or allow yourself the time to sleep. And sometimes we have to push other things aside and say, we can't do everything. So you push some things aside, but you make that certain time that's bedtime. So just the same way that you would put your children to sleep at a bedtime, you put yourself to sleep at a bedtime also. And then your body comes to expect that you're going to sleep at this time, and it starts to prepare itself and allow for sleep to come to you. So you're not having to chase sleep all the time if your sleeping schedule is erratic.
Oh, I like that image, having sleep come to you as opposed to chasing it. Chasing it, it seems like you can't catch it anyway.
Right. It's like the carrot that's always dangling in front of you. You never can catch the sleep. You have to let it come to you.
So Daphne, one of my first encounters with someone with diabetes was when I was 17, and a good friend of mine and I were out. And the next thing I knew, she said she was feeling kind of faint and almost practically fainted, and we had to grab a candy bar from her purse for her to munch on. And she's like, oh yeah, I'm diabetic. And I thought, is this what people with diabetes do? Do they just carry around candy? Is that supposed to help them stabilize their blood sugar?
So unfortunately, that's pretty common, but not necessarily the right way to go. So I guess the definition of diabetes is the inability to manage blood sugar. So without diabetes, your blood sugar it has the mechanisms to stay fairly even keel. So it'll go up a little bit whenever you eat, and then your pancreas secretes insulin and the blood sugar comes down. So for someone who has diabetes, it can be a couple of different things. Either their blood sugar goes up and they have a hard time with the secretion of insulin, so that the insulin doesn't help to bring the blood sugar down. But sometimes when the blood sugar comes down, it comes down too much. And so your blood vessels like for there to be a very specific amount of glucose or blood sugar in your blood. Mm-hmm. And so if that blood sugar starts to come down, then you do need to have something that has glucose to bring it back up. So unfortunately, a lot of people will grab something like a candy bar or a piece of candy because it has fast-acting glucose that's going to bring the blood sugar up quickly. So while that's not the best way to handle it, you do have to have sugar or glucose during that time to bring that blood sugar up, because it can become very dangerous. Mm-hmm. And in fact, blood sugar going down and having a low blood sugar is much more dangerous than high blood sugar in the short term. Mm-hmm. You're more likely to pass out, or even children specifically, and probably the older population that's taking insulin have more hypoglycemic reactions, meaning their blood sugar comes down too low, and that can be very dangerous.
So since most of our listeners are people who are focused on diet, let's talk about how we can improve our health or help resolve or manage diabetes through diet now.
The term diet just simply means the foods that you eat. Okay,
right.
It's not a restriction of food, it's just the foods that you eat. But our culture has kind of turned it into foods that are allowed and foods that are not allowed on specific diets. There are many diets, quote-unquote diets, that can help with managing blood sugar. Some of the ones that are most commonly used would be a low-carb diet, which means that you limit the amount of carbohydrates that you consume, no matter where the carbohydrates come from. And then they have what's called the low glycemic diet. And the low glycemic diet is limiting the amount of foods that are known to increase blood sugar significantly. Mm. And so there's a whole glycemic scale, and there are a lot of things that can affect the foods that will make your blood sugar go up and down. But those are two primary diets that are often used for diabetes. Then there's also, people have gotten good response from what I'll call just traditional diets. So the paleo, primal, Weston Price diets. I know that they're not all the same, but there are a lot of similarities. And then a ketogenic diet where there's a significant amount of fat that's being consumed. That can be helpful for managing blood sugar, specifically in the short term. That's not something that I would encourage for long periods of time. But the bottom line is that there are lots of foods that are allowed, and those are going to include all of our meats and organ meats that are nutrient dense. Mm-hmm. All non-starchy vegetables, so all of our greens and things like carrots and broccoli and all of our vegetables are allowed on all of the diets that are encouraged for people with diabetes. And then, smaller amounts of the starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes and our winter squashes. But you can always include things like eggs. We can always include nuts and seeds. So those things are all really good foods that are nutrient dense to have if you have diabetes. Where it gets a little bit sticky is with some things like fruits, the variety of different fruits, because they do have carbohydrates. So we have to be careful with what kinds of fruits, and more importantly, how much fruit you would have at one time. So while they do have nutrients in them, we don't want to just eat all our fruits and vegetables, because fruits have a lot of carbohydrates, which will then turn into glucose.
Do you know anybody who has diabetes right now in your life who's changed their diet and seen some health improvements?
Oh, absolutely. I work with people on a regular basis that either, I work with people from all sorts, the whole scale, the whole gambit. Some people who were eating McDonald's last week and then get diagnosed with diabetes, and all of a sudden they're in my office going, oh my gosh, what do I do now? And then I work with people that have had diabetes for many, many years and are doing their best to manage it. And, they've already explored a lot of the diet part, and I help them kind of fine tune what they need to be doing, how to fine-tune what they should eat. So are beans allowed? Because beans are high in carbohydrates. Should we have beans? Should we have dairy? Those kind of things to help just fine-tune exactly what kind of foods they should be having.
Do you think some people take diabetes as kind of, oh, well, this is just something I'm going to live with the rest of my life? Are there people who give up, I guess, and think there's no way to manage it beyond whatever conventional medicine has to offer?
Oh, absolutely. So there is a genetic component to diabetes, which means, like, for instance, my dad has diabetes, which puts me at a higher risk for having diabetes. And it's specifically for men, and passing diabetes on to their daughters is pretty common. So there is a genetic component, but as we very well know, our genes are not written in stone. We have a lot of influence to what happens with our genes. I don't know for sure if they know exactly what genes contribute to diabetes, but there is a genetic component to it. So a lot of people will say, well, I got diagnosed with the sugar, and my parents have it and my grandparents have it, so it's just kind of, it was inevitable it was going to happen. But we know very well that, at that point of diagnosis, you can do a lot of things to manage the blood sugar and get it very well under control so that it's not going to cause problems later on.
Hey, stick around for the second half of the show. Daphne shares some success stories of those who've managed diabetes successfully and others who have not done so well. And right now we want to thank our sponsors, the Weston A. Price Foundation. Confused about nutrition? The Weston A. Price Foundation sets the record straight. Find out why butter is a health food, why soy foods are not your friend, and why optimal health is found in the wise food traditions of our ancestors at westonaprice.org. And listeners like you, did you know that we set up a Patreon account? It's an easy way to give to support the show. Go to patreon.com, patreon.com, and type in Wise Traditions in the search bar. When you pledge to give on a monthly basis, it's kind of like getting a backstage pass to the show. You'll get the inside scoop on what we're up to behind the scenes with the podcast. Check it out at patreon.com, and thanks. Now, how do people monitor it? I have a friend that used to have it as well, and she used to have to prick her finger every day and do like this little blood test. Do people still do that?
Yeah, unfortunately, there are only 2 ways to check blood sugar. Well, I guess 3. The in-home ways are to check your blood sugar with a little blood sugar meter where you have the needle and you poke your finger and you get a drop of blood and you put it on a strip and the meter reads it. That's one way. There's something called a continuous glucose monitor where you insert a catheter underneath the skin in your abdominal area usually. It will transfer the information of what's going on with your blood sugar to a transmitter. And so you can see real time what your blood sugar is doing all the time. And then the third way would be, of course, whenever you go to your doctor and they do, a blood draw and they check your blood sugar that way. But unfortunately, those are the only ways. You still have to poke your finger and you still have to see the blood to be able to get a number for your blood sugar.
But it's not just that it's uncomfortable. I do believe diabetes is life-threatening in some senses, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. People don't necessarily die from diabetes. They die from the complications of diabetes.
Which is kind of like saying the person didn't die from the fall, they died from hitting the ground. You know what I mean?
Right.
They're related for sure.
They're very related. And so on a death certificate, it's very unlikely that someone's going to have died from diabetes. They're going to have died from either a heart attack or maybe kidney disease or vascular dysfunction. It's not necessarily diabetes that does it, but diabetes causes other complications, and those complications are what's life-threatening. So by managing blood sugar and managing diabetes, you're managing a whole plethora of other disease processes that happen.
So the best thing, it sounds like to me, to do, for starters, is to try to manage these things in your life, your diet, your sleep, your stress levels, so that you won't even get there, even if you do have a genetic predisposition for it, correct?
Absolutely. And like we talked about, those are all lifestyle things that everybody's trying to manage. I kind of think of it as diabetes almost gives you an excuse or a reason to have to manage it. Because for a lot of people, our mindset is that, oh, well, I can go until you hit that wall, and then you have to stop. And you have to face the decisions that you've made in the past and really reevaluate the way that you've handled your life and the way that you live your life. So like I said, it kind of gives you a reason or excuse to live the best life that you can.
Daphne, can you tell me a story of someone who has managed this successfully?
Oh, of course. And I see these people all the time. So there's a guy that was referred to me by his conventional doctor. You know, I'm from South Louisiana. We have Cajun people there, and the Cajuns really like people all over the country, but there's a very strong tie to food and to fun and, you know, partying, and everything's just a big party in South Louisiana. So this particular guy, he was young. I want to say he was early 30s. I can't remember for sure. He was not what I would typically think of whenever you look at somebody. You wouldn't look at him and say, oh, he's probably having some problems with blood sugar, because he was thin. And when we started talking about his diet, he was a single guy. He lived alone. I want to say his mom would cook for him every now and then, but for the most part, his diet was fast food and pizza and sandwiches, cereal. I mean, he really wasn't much into cooking or doing anything. It just wasn't in the forefront of his mind. And he came in with blood sugars that were pretty high, a hemoglobin A1C of about a 9. Which means that his blood sugars were running about 270, 250, something like that, which is pretty high. And he lived a very sedentary life. He was an architect, and so he spent a lot of time at work and, you know, wasn't very active. And within 3 months of working with him, from the time he was diagnosed, we got his A1C down to 6.5, which is pretty normal. And he was not loving the cooking part, but he was doing some meal preparation for himself, much less fast food. He said he reserved that only for times whenever he was with his buddies and they were hanging out on the weekend. He had started running, and so I don't always encourage everybody to run, but in this guy, for his purposes, running was the easiest thing that he kind of started to enjoy, and completely changed his whole lifestyle. And still to this day, he's doing really well with his diabetes. And those stories happen all the time. The challenge is that you have to make up your mind that this is something that you want to do, because you really have to put forth effort. And just like anything, you're going to get a great result when you put forth some effort.
So I hate to bring this up, but are there people who don't do the effort and you see no change?
Oh, well, absolutely. You know, it happens a lot. In fact, I have a friend, he's my age, so early 40s, and he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as a child. And so he's dealt with type 1 diabetes for many years. And because of his lifestyle, he developed what he calls type 1.5. So he has all of the symptoms of type 2 diabetes, but his body is not producing insulin, and he has to use injected insulin. So he's like, you know, this new, what they call type 1.5, so type 1 and type 2. And for many, many, many years, I've tried to work with him, just even socially. He's a very good, dear friend of mine. He's just not really wanting to put forth much effort to make himself better. In his mind, this is what he's going to have forever, and he can't do anything about it. So it happens that way too. But certainly catching it early is the key, because when you catch it early, a lot of times people get scared and they're willing to make the change. And so catching it early is key. And then, it's just like anything else. It takes persistence and it takes the willingness to make change.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to ask about earlier. Like, do people have a fatalistic attitude, like, oh, well, I'm just going to have this the rest of my life? And if they do have that attitude, do they suffer much, or is it just kind of an inconvenience? How do you see all that? Is it progressive? I guess that's my other question.
Yes, diabetes is progressive. So in the beginning, you may not necessarily feel bad. You may not necessarily even know. It's kind of a silent disease. So you won't necessarily know that you even have problems with blood sugar. But as the years progress, for everybody it's very different. So it may take 10 years or 20 years, or for some people they have problems whenever their blood sugar has been elevated for as little as like 5 or 7 years. And then, as I said, before you even get diagnosed, you usually had problems with blood sugar increasing for many years prior to that. So yeah, people sometimes will say, no, it's not worth me doing anything. And then they'll start to feel a little bit worse, and they start having problems that reflect in other ways. So they may start losing some vision, or have blurred vision, or lose their night vision. They'll start having some kidney dysfunction. They may start losing circulation in their fingers and toes, and so it loses the blood flow that nourishes the nerves there. So they get tingling in the fingers and toes. So there definitely are side effects. Fortunately, unfortunately, it sometimes can take many years to start developing those side effects. And usually by that time, damage has occurred, and we can't always reverse the damage that happens.
Unfortunately, we often wait until the pain is quite serious before we make a change. Right. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
But I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. And overall, it sounds like you're able to really help people manage and even resolve, to some extent, the diabetes, right?
Well, if somebody is willing, the term that I often tell people is that if you're willing to help yourself, then I am more than willing to help you. But if I'm working at it harder than you are, then, we might as well part ways, and whenever you're ready, we can make changes.
Well, Daphne, as we prepare to wrap up, I want to ask you, if the listener could only do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend they do? I
think whether it's their health or diabetes in general, I think that cutting out sugar, or being very cognizant of the amount of sugar that you consume, even the quote-unquote healthy sugars, that is probably the one best thing that you can do for your health, because it has an effect on blood sugar, obviously, but it also has an effect on sleep and inflammation and thyroid dysfunction. So that's probably the one thing I would say, is to really be cognizant or cut out sugar altogether.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Daphne. I'm so glad you talked with us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
My guest today was Daphne Olivier. For more on Daphne and all she does, go to myfoodcoach.tv. She offers courses in Louisiana and online resources for everybody who wants to learn more about managing diabetes through real food. If you'd like, you can just find out more by going to westinaprice.org, clicking on the word podcast, and going to the show notes for episode 62. For highlights of today's show, go to westinaprice.org, click on the word podcast, and go to the show notes for episode 62.
Thanks for listening today. Our website, westinaprice.org, offers free resources to address your questions and support your journey to health. You'll find videos, articles, and brochures covering a broad variety of health topics. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.